Good evening, everyone. It feels great to be back with the OPPI fraternity after almost 5 years. I think last time I attended was in 2019. And when I became the OPPI president in 2020, I got COVID along. So, never got a chance to meet people in person. Shailesh, great to see you here. And, Suresh, when you're talking about Mr. Shahani, it felt so strange because all these years at every OPPI function, he would always be there. And we all knew him from OPPI days. I knew him since '85. He was my first boss in ICI. And always a positive way of figuring out how to help you, how to say certain things, how to manage a crisis, and how to manage even the topic we are talking about, change in leadership. I think the things we have all learned from him on leadership in organization and industry has been phenomenal. And the reason I also speak of him is he's someone who has changed industries. And Prabir, I wanted to start off by asking you, in pharma, we have this belief it's a regulated industry. We have such great challenges. We have so many restrictions. And now what we are seeing is even a further change in the environment, in the market, in the regulatory landscape, including the kind of restrictions, I would say, the way we have to do business compared to what it used to be 15, 20 years back. The kind of products, everyone is moving towards specialty, the way we used to do earlier products, large field forces. A lot has changed. We've been reading about it. You have a diverse background. Do you believe this is unique to pharma, or are industries continuously facing challenges?
Thank you, and thank you, OPPI, for inviting me. I think I come back to an OPPI forum after almost 10 years. I remember last I spoke was when I was the CHRO at Reliance. Sharad, great question. And as someone who has kind of personally traversed all the way from the civil service to now advising and pharma and automotives and engineering, I don't think it's unique to an industry. In fact, I will make a confession. Every company that I joined as a CHRO or before that in my executive life, every company, pharma included, as part of their induction would tell me we're unique. After doing all that and now advising clients across industries, I can tell you it is not unique. There are nuances, but the fundamentals are by and large the same, the fundamentals. How you apply the fundamentals change. So your products will be different. Maybe your customers will be different. Maybe some of the regulatory framework will be different. But the fact of overdoing the sense of uniqueness and therefore hiding behind, my hands are tied. And the best example is not from pharma, but I do get invited by my first job of a decade, the civil service. I speak to a lot of government companies, departments. And when they call me, they say, but Prabir, we are a Sarkari setup. We can't do leadership differently. And it is absolutely untrue. So many a time it's become an alibi or an excuse. So we must respect nuances, but the fundamentals I don't think, are unique. And pharma to that extent is not unique. You're the best example. I remember hiring Sharad into Dr. Reddy's many, many years ago. He was not a pharma guy. Now he's sitting as a pharma veteran, right? So I've done this all my life. I at leadership levels, I have been agnostic to industry, irrespective of the sector or company I was a CHRO in. Because at the top, what you need is strategic thinking, the ability to inspire, influence, deal with stakeholders, influence policy shaping. None of which is actually unique only to pharma or only to...
That's interesting, Prabir. And, you spoke about being industry agnostic in a lot of things. Now, you have yourself traversed, like you said, starting from civil service to pharma to automotive to now doing your own. Do you believe that because you did a lot of changes and took up, so to say, risk yourself, you were able to take that risk in your business decisions. And someone who has been in a sort of a comforted environment of knowing a setup, a industry day in and day out, may have issues in taking risks to go beyond what they already know. I mean, today we have an environment in pharma, in several industries, where you need to have that risk-taking capability. And when I'm talking about risk-taking capability, I'm not talking about compliances and legal risk, et cetera. It's about how you look at business. How did you manage the risks, and what's your view on the question I raised?
So first, as an individual, if you see it from a career lens perspective, right? There's always a risk. When you decide after 10 years to resign from the government and come to the big bad world of corporate life, you're giving up an assured life with pension and, lifelong medical cover and the perks. I mean, when you see your batchmates as secretaries to the government of India, some days you do feel bad that what am I doing, I would rather have been secretary to the government of India today. But, the fact is, unless you take risks, you don't learn. And you don't learn unless you disrupt. And I believe if you can disrupt and learn, money, reputation, all the trappings follow. So personally to me, I have a very publicly stated position about why individuals want to kind of go 2 levels higher but remain doing a job 2 levels lower, because that's the comfort factor. The titles change. So I believe changing sectors, changing functions, rotating experiences is very, very key. Very, very key. And in today's world, the more we see the shift from VUCA to BANI, I'm even more convinced. There are specialists in every industry and every organization who can do better than you. But as you move up the hierarchy, what is needed is the ability to see a picture beyond what has been seen, to reconnect the dots, to actually disrupt, to challenge. When I joined Tata Motors as the global CHRO, I had no idea of truck weight and automotive terms. So you just ask people. Sometimes it may look stupid to some, that the CHRO doesn't know, but he doesn't know. Or when I remember joining Dr. Reddy's day 1 or day 2, I said, what is API? I had never heard the word API ever in my life. Right? So, nothing is rocket science, and that I'm convinced about. We make this, at the end of the day, we are not, at least in most of the functions, unless you're doing a hardcore R&D or NASA work. So I think for industries, for companies, for leadership teams, the word I have been using a lot, and if anyone reads a lot of what I write, I use the word pluralism. There is not enough pluralism in thinking. When you hire teams, you want the same guys from the same set of companies to come, and the same guys come, your salaries go up, but nothing changes in your thinking, because the guy thinks exactly the way he was thinking in his last job. When I was with generic pharma earlier, the IPA was very active in the sense of quality, but one of the issues from an HR perspective was, look at the way the quality guys have moved around. You just track that. But the quality issues remain the same. So I think what you need, or many years ago in Dr. Reddy's, I think this was a time when it was maybe blasphemous to talk about that. I hired from Unilever a person to head a plant. And when I joined automotive, sorry to maybe shock the system, I thought automotives have a higher quality standard expectation by law than pharmaceuticals. It's a myth, even I never thought. Right? So the fact is, only when you move around, there is cross-industry learning, there are many myths we dispel, and most important, who are the challengers to an industry? Who are the challengers to a system? And I think that is very sorely missing in many, many industries, maybe even pharma.
Okay. At this point, any comments or questions? We don't want to leave things to the end. We don't know how much we'll end up talking. So very happy to take any queries, any thoughts?
These are only a perspective. It is not the gospel for sure. So please feel free to disagree. It's fine.
Okay, we'll carry on. So when we talk about these, exposure to different industries, to different patients, etc., how do you believe that impacts the leadership qualities of the individuals, because it's one thing saying, let's hire from outside or let's rotate functions. We see a lot of that, right? In a lot of organizations, we say we want to rotate functions, etc. But even that we do in a very limited way. The medicine guy will not move into business so easily, or the quality guy will not become an HR head so easily, or whatever. But where do you believe this, and what do you believe this brings in? And have you seen that actually?
So, it's all about genetic pool. Look at an organization and its genetic pool. If you don't rotate people, if you don't inject fresh thinking, you don't inject fresh talent, it is going to be a very inbred system. Forget the ideas, cultures. I do a lot of work in the area of culture renovation, and I believe cultures get sterile because we typically try and solve what I call a pediatric problem with a geriatric solution. It worked in 1985, it worked in 1995. Yes, sir, it did. But it may not necessarily be the solution for today's problem. So when you kind of rotate people, or when you get in some fresh minds and experiences, I am convinced you get a very, very different way of looking at a problem. And the problem starts all the way from the boards. You look at the board design in most companies. Again, with a lot of my client companies, I do work with, and it's the same set of people. Same set of people. How will you ever think different? Cultures are exceedingly hierarchical in most companies. Because there's no one who feels it's different. Because, when everyone is having the same experience, everyone thinks it's great. Because you don't know what is different.
Prabir, what's a good time to bring in that kind of experience or mindset? Is it a time of great challenges, like it's now for, say, the industry, or when things are going extremely well, or there is really no time?
There is no time. A crisis makes it a very convenient excuse. That's not smart leadership. That's not courageous leadership. Do it when things are going well. You always rock the boat because the rocking is more manageable. But the challenge is, and also the question that you raised earlier, why do you find a lot of talent hoarding? Everyone wants his or her appraisal target to be met. So you want your team in place. I have had an experience many a time that, I got copied on an email. It was a chain mail. And I picked up the phone and I remember talking to the site head. And I said, what's happening here? Why are you not releasing this guy for an internal job? And the guy gave me a long story. Without him, basically the world will collapse. First of all, it's bad management practice that if there is one person who's holding your entire system to ransom, you are not doing your job first. And it can start all the way from the CEO, but function heads, department heads, site heads, whatever. As luck would have it, anyway, I told him that in 2 days, the guy has to be released, and whatever happens, you learn to manage it. 2 days later, I got copied on the same set of emails where the guy, the long story short was, he had resigned. And the site head is saying, I'm releasing him with immediate effect out of the company. The same guy without whom the world would have collapsed, 48 hours later is being. So I again called him and I said, what happened now? And he says, I'm retaining goodwill. The challenge of this happening is everyone wants to make sure that his bonus or her bonus, her KRAs, his KRAs are protected. Who is taking a longitudinal view? And that is why I believe niyat is important. Intentionality of leadership is important. We say the right things from every pulpit you can think of. Every company, every industry body, wherever I go, no one says the wrong thing from the pulpit. But when you start talking to the organization and to people, you realize it's the same story again. So we have to move to niyat before we start implementing niti. And niyat is at a discount today because the entire reward system, in my view, is a little flawed.
Prabir, I have to ask this question. It may be tangential. What's your view on Hardik Pandya and Mumbai Indians?
Well,
Conversations on Facebook, LinkedIn, WhatsApp.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware of
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's a leader. changing the culture, changing the dynamics?
You know,
What's your view?
it's a question that you asked me a little earlier. You know, if everything were to go right every time, where is courage needed? Where is courage needed? Sometimes you won't get it right. Sometimes it will be the wrong call. Leadership is not God. But the fear of failure cannot be an excuse for leadership to continue with status quo ad infinitum. That is my problem. Experiment, yes, some things will go wrong. You and I have been in the business of leadership. Did we get 100% of all our calls right? No. Maybe God won't get it right. You get 70% of your calls right, you're a goddamn brilliant leader. But I worked in very large companies, and one of the biggest cultural issues in these organizations that I saw, very successful companies though, very senior leaders not allowed to take decisions. And I remember telling the big guy of this company is why the problem, and he told me, he says, why don't you take my plane or whatever and send them to Harvard and Wharton for leadership courses? I said, if that was what would have solved your problem, you wouldn't have needed me. The problem is not there. The problem is, do you allow people to fail? Someone like you invited me some years ago to say, Prabir, I want to make my culture very innovation-centered. Can you help me? And it was over lunch we were chatting, and I asked the CEO of that company who was talking to me, and I said, you must be doing awards nights like OPPI is doing today. Tell me, in the last 5 years, did you ever celebrate a failure? Now, it sounds intuitive when I ask this question, but let's look around. Do we celebrate failures enough? So I'm not worried about the odd failure. It will always happen. But the fact is, we are shy culturally, and from a leadership perspective of taking risks is my problem. One of the articles I wrote, I still remember the line, I said, the challenge with most corporations is we are, what did I say? We are obsessed with leaders, but we are not paranoid about leadership. And there's a big difference between leaders, the individual, and leadership. And honestly, it's not just a grammar difference, it's a big difference.
So I'm going to catch you on that, and I'm going to stay with
Sorry if this is, am I connecting with you guys? It's important. I just think a little different than what is politically right. But
no, but I'm going to stick to Mumbai Indians and Hardik Pandya, because I'm personally very vested in that. I have got some bets going on in the WhatsApp
but
forums.
I'm not the guy following IPL too closely, but still.
But the thing is, the recurring theme is, it's not about what you did, it's about how you did it.
Correct.
And do you believe that in times like these, when challenges are there, and you do want to bring in leadership changes, you do want to bring in a new sort of, say, a culture, etc., probably the most important thing is how you do it. Now, within the room, I'm sure there would be examples where, let's say, someone who was your peer is now your boss. Okay, it keeps happening all the time. But how do you bring about that kind of a change or organization to make sure that everyone rallies around to what's the common cause?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you do it? Everyone says, yes, we must do it, but how would you say, as being the CHRO, would you do that?
So, two things. One, it depends on the organization as represented by, let us say, the chief executive or the CHRO. And the other part is the new role holder, the guy who gets into the job. You know, and I've had that situation when I became the CHRO for the first time. There were a couple of peers of mine who may have felt bad. It's possible. But the organization took a call. So one is, how do you sell and explain without being defensive? You see, if you are defensive, you lose the plot up front. But you have to be very respectful and mindful of emotions. See, my experience is people may feel hurt, upset, and disappointed. It is human nature. It doesn't necessarily help you change the decision. But empathy allows the person to start digesting with the reality of the new decision.
So, Prabir, would you then say that if in such an environment, a colleague or an employee who has been loyal to you, has worked extremely closely with you, but situation demands that he's no longer required. Would you put it on the HR and system to deal, or would you, as the leader, actually convince and tell the guy what's happening here?
Brilliant question. What do you think happens?
What I said first, you tell the system to manage it.
You normally ask someone to do the dirty job. Never a good idea. You know, it is your job to break the bad news. Rest of it is the details of execution. I mean, there was a time I was a CHRO of a company, and I was in the US to fire the president of our US business, who was a colleague of mine on the management team. Now, all the detailing of when what will happen and blah, 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 I was part of the crime. But I did tell the MD of the company, you will have to call that guy. I will be in the office, but it is your job. It is not my job to carry your whatever resignation letter. And to be fair, that guy did that job. Maybe it was very tough for him. Many senior leaders actually feel it very odd. Not all, but many do. But I think it is always the responsibility. I have always believed good news or bad news, if you are the manager of that position, it is your responsibility to be the chief communications person for that particular person. It is your job. You cannot say, I'll give him the promotion letter and the incentive and the reward, but I won't tell him that he's been rated low or talk to HR or look into the system. HR's job is to advise, coach, because it's a delicate exercise. And especially when you're making choices, especially of elevation or where you don't have place for two things can happen. Either the guy makes peace, acknowledges, realizes, or maybe appreciates that maybe that guy was the better guy and I still have a big enough job to do. Ideal situation. But at the same time, if the person decides to leave, that's part of your thought process, that if the guy leaves, but does the guy leave as a good brand ambassador of, I have a lot of blood on my hand. But the effort should be, does the guy go with his head held high, unless it's an obvious integrity or such issue. And I think that is the other thing which doesn't get done too well. Sensitivity, the grace. And I've seen this in my experience, even when you've let go of a CEO. I mean, you don't even have the courtesy of a management dinner. I mean, it is shocking to me. And these are some frontline companies that I'm talking about. So there has to be grace. There has to be a basic respect because at the end of the day, the chakra just moves on. And, at the end of the day, you must take calls. But you don't know. Time alone will say whether that was the ideal call. In what time perspective would it be proved to be the right call or the wrong call? You don't know. So I think grace, but clarity and conviction. I think that's very important.
And empathy, that's the buzzword nowadays, right?
In fact, I'm using a new word these days. It's about practiced empathy. Saying that I'm an empathic leader does not mean anything. Do you practice empathy? Do you listen? Do you acknowledge? Sometimes you don't have to say anything. But do you give time? I mean, sometimes leaders are just not available. Yeah, I'll talk to you when I'm back from my trip to Hong Kong or I'm back from my trip to the US. It never happens. No one remembers. So it's practiced empathy. It has to be exhibited because, Sharad, you know this as well as I do. Lunch table conversations, which actually start reflecting the culture, the prevailing culture, that changes. I once worked, I was still relatively middle order batsman at that time, and it was a different sector. And we went through a major downsizing. The CEO was largely in the US, and all he was interested in was his Excel sheet of how many people, Prabir, did you let go today? It was terrible. It was for me emotionally a very tough time. I was much younger. There were batches of IITians we had welcomed 4 weeks earlier, and 4 weeks later you say, is it their fault? The CEO once came. This was supposed to be India-centered, but he was conveniently in the US. So you learn a lot of leadership lessons by observing people who did not do things right? And he would go with one of his senior colleagues to the cafeteria, talking to him, and again, just go out. He never stopped by to say hello. He never walked around the floors. So, when people see all this, it doesn't matter what then you write or you send out an email.
Prabir, the media, the news is all about the wrong way people do these things, right? Because that seems to be more sellable. And the impression one gets is that it's okay to do it. It's okay to just write an email to a mass of employees, the way we have been reading about it. Why don't people become, what's the reason? Because this is some of the things, we are all going through massive changes, and one of the things which bothers any leader the most, I can tell you that, and it gives sleepless nights, is I have to tell this guy tomorrow that he's no longer required. And why do people do? They just don't want to face it? What's
it is emotionally tough. And especially if you have to let go of people you have known, it is even worse, right? And maybe there's a sense of guilt because maybe you knew this was possibly going to happen, but you never gave feedback. You could have given feedback. Did you ever tell this guy that potentially the guy is going on the downhill track? You never did. So relationships, tenure, the sense of guilt that I could have prepared him better. Maybe I could have coached him 5 years ago differently. Maybe if I had given him this feedback. So, at the end of the day, it can make anyone have sweaty palms because it's not a pleasant thing to do. And you understand the implications. In India, it is worse because in India, you do not even have social security typically, right? So the risks for the family. So I think the human angle is true. But, both in my executive life and now when I coach a lot of senior leaders, avoidance does not make truth any easier. It is better to confront that reality. And even if you've not done, can you do it in a nice way? Where do you do it? The time of the day, the place that you actually have this news. Do you have to tell the guy that, tomorrow morning you don't come? Or are you saying, what, things are not looking good? You have 3 months, 6 months. There's a way of doing it. Can you preserve the nicety? People, I'll be honest, whether it's rating or a job or whatever else, dealing with disappointment is all our jobs.
It's not just this, and I know this is not a very happy topic, but when we talk of challenges, it's not just about the people part. It's also about the way we have been doing business. Because you are told, okay, guys, now we are going to change the way we do business. And that gets everyone a bit rattled because you are getting into something you don't want to do. And you're getting into an area where you're constantly fighting this feeling that, why am I getting into this? And one is the top leadership, but I think the guys and the business leader who get the brunt the most are those in the middle. The guys who corporate is driving a message and whose team, who sees them to be their sort of a voice, are pushing back on why we are doing this. That business leader who's stuck in the middle, how does he or she deal with this entire pressure that comes from change management, from new honestly, in an organization, you want these guys to be excited about a new challenge, but more often than not, they get crushed. What would you tell them how to deal?
So I'm speaking on this subject in Singapore next week. Exactly. Are we middling it right? Ask ourselves a question. In the normal course, either we are obsessed with the senior leaders, Prabir, come and coach the C-suite, or Prabir, what's the way of getting these fresh entrants into the system? The middle management typically has been the most neglected, underdeveloped resource in the company. And this is industry agnostic. I've seen it everywhere. And then we expect that they will emerge to be great leaders. So that's the first part. Second part is...
And when they're getting that opportunity, then they say, let's put them through a leadership program.
That's right. And, it's too late. At the end of the day, you should have thought about it 10 years ago, 15 years. That time, this becomes a cost. It's not seen as an investment. Back to that issue of niti. I will be answering this question in 2 parts. Change is not always pleasant. And change will always continue to happen with us or without us. The middle management also at some level is divorced from a perspective that change could potentially be coming our way. See, I always believe it's first our fault as the top leadership of the company. We have not educated them enough. We have not prepared them enough. We have not been honest enough with them.
Worse, Prabir, we have allowed monkey mail to take over.
We have. Absolutely we have. There's no doubt about it. And the fact is then when finally the moment comes, when it comes, then it is all about chaos. And these are underprepared. They are people who are going to fight with toy guns. You can't fight in NBC warfare with 303 weapons. That's my pediatric, geriatric question. Now, there are two approaches. One, you have no choice but to handhold, support, stand by them. But at the same time, I'll also be honest. If you are in that situation, you do not have the luxury of time. You cannot be a top leader and say, I'm going to make sure 100% of the people will be kind of taken along, and you don't have that kind of time. And that is where judgment is important. Who are the guys? I believe from my experience, there are 20% people who are typically pro-change, 10 to 20% who are absolutely anti-change. The balance 60% are fence-sitters. The question is, how do you make the fence-sitters move? I wouldn't waste my effort on the bottom 10 or 20%. Do what you will, because it is also reflective of their anxiety. Many a time I'm asked this question, that Prabir, my career, etc. I said, it is better for you to have your boss be worried about you leaving him than about being over-dependent on the boss, because it reflects on you. If you have the aptitude, the skills, the potential, the reputation, it is always the boss's headache to make sure that you are kind of threaded in well. But that doesn't happen, because you're just talking about, oh, I've got 20 years of seniority, 10 years of seniority. In India particularly, it's a big cultural problem, because, years of seniority, who cares? Who cares? And I think, again, it's back to that issue. We have actually created a system where there are more order takers and challengers, because that's the quality of leadership we have. Let's be honest, me included. And that is why I talk about plurality. Who on your team challenges you? I mean, when I talk to a lot of my chairmen or CEOs of companies, I tell them, all right, let's just discuss your management suite. It is okay to pick some cards and drop some cards, starting from the top. And the question I ask is, for this salary, for this role, given a 5-year outlook that you have of expectations and the context, would you still have that guy? Now you can be shy and be dishonest about it, but the 5th year, you will face a reality of the question that you were asking. So either use these 5 years to try and get the guy to be fit for purpose, or cut your losses when you can still cut your losses and help the guy get on to doing things for which the person is better equipped. Like I will tell you with an MNC, since it's a lot of MNC thing, the salary levels are much higher. But are the skills level very different than what I saw in non-MNC companies? Not really. So and I do get resumes, right? So I know. Now you're at this compensation, but your skill level is not really there. What do? You feel trapped. So it's always better to be a little under par on compensation, but actually do a job which actually is a meatier job. It's that classic thing, but I blame individuals. There is not enough of true career conversation. Most people don't even understand what is a career beyond a title change and money. So all of this compounds and makes the culture that when the going is good, life is fine. A lot of muck gets hidden, right? Your processes, systems. There's a company which I was invited to, 14 levels. And says, I want to be an agile company. I said, even if you put Prabir at level 8, I will become a babu. Because your structure is designed wrong. Or your promotion norms are, I want 30 years of stability.
Prabir, here is we're talking about multinationals, talking about Indian companies. Now, and I'm very empathetic towards multinationals in India, especially in pharma. Because to effectively deal with the challenges you have in this country, you need to have a certain flexibility and a certain ability to deal with it. But unfortunately, globally, multinationals have got certain very rigid do's and don'ts, and right from what we call enabling functions to even business functions, you get this feeling of being trapped. And I will not go into the merits or demerits of that, but as leaders, I have also found that, especially in India, if you suggest to someone, why don't you take on a coach? It's seen as a negative. अरे मुझे बोला coach के लिए ले लो, मतलब मेरे में कुछ problem है. Whereas globally, individuals themselves would reach out to life coaches and coaches to say, I'm struggling and I need help. Because in an organization, if you're the leader, who do you talk to? Who do you go to for help? If you go for help, you're seen as weak. If you ask for help, you're seen, oh, this guy doesn't seem to be able to manage his job.
Brilliant, brilliant observation. In fact, I have had that experience in the last 5 years, experimenting with my own advisory and the kind of things I do. There are many senior people, very senior people, C-suite leaders, who reach out and say, Prabir, I'll pay you your fee privately, but I want this help. Absolutely the issue. And it is sad that, but I don't want my company to know. Now, the first myth is that coaching will always be about a weakness. You can actually coach a guy to leverage his or her strengths a lot better. But many a time, you'll be surprised, Sharad, people are not even conscious of their strengths. No one ever told. I always share an anecdote. I was a young civil servant, first posting. I'd finished with my boss. It's a very interesting anecdote. In the afternoon, I was going out of his big room, and he said, Prabir, come back. One more thing I forgot to tell you. Now, while I know he can't sack me because that I have presidential right to 37 years of service, but still the boss calling you, you have butterflies in your stomach. And I said, yeah, okay. So I came back, I sat down. He says, Prabir, I've learned something from you. And there's a story I've shared many a times. I'm taking the liberty. And, typical junior officer, you said, sir, from me, poor me, you're a big guy. He says, yes, I've been observing you. Now my heart sank. Observing me, my God, what have I done, right? Because the recall is always the boss will be talking negative. And he said that, Prabir, I've been observing you, and I find every day you make it a point to at least compliment someone on your team. So whatever the conversation, it ended. But by the time I went home, I started thinking. And it was true. I was not aware of it. But so early in my career, someone told me this, and I actually leveraged it to the hilt in my career. So coaching can be for strength. Coaching can be, I again am not a believer, at least with clients, that please put one guy in a coaching program. Very bad thinking. I wrote an article, coaching is just not about an individual getting better. Coaching is the way you change the way you run your company. So it has to be a movement. But, do you have the time? The challenge actually which companies are having is partly the realities of the world, the quarter on quarter. Everyone is in the business of band-aidism. And I understand that. But, the fact is that if you're thinking your tenure is for 2 years, 3 years, and it must be okay for my time, then it's fine.
Yeah, I think bit about stigma. The way it used to be, say, about mental health, people would not go to counselors. I think individuals, leaders should have that openness in their mind to say, I need help. And okay, whether you do it through an organization, fine, or even personally, they should.
No, they don't even have to say, I need help. But I can tell you, I'm not sure there are many of the leaders here, you're lonely at the top. You're the CEO of the company. Who typically comes and keeps you honest? I will be honest, I don't see many CHROs do that job very well. Who keeps you honest? Because finally you are the guy who's kind of sitting on and shaping their destiny. So sometimes you just want someone to talk to. For example, I have some of my coaches, the chairman of companies, successful people. Not that there is a problem, but the fact is only when you start in that conversation, you realize there is so much more that the person could be doing, or he's wrestling with so many contradictions within the family, within the professional ecosystem. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have a coach. It clears up your mind. A coach never gives you a prescription. So I always say, as an advisor, maybe I can give you a prescription. As a coach, you will discover your answers. But just framing the questions, and it doesn't have to be a guy who understands your industry, your function. It is agnostic. But I think it's important. But this middle management thing that you've talked about actually is a very, very burning issue. I feel very worried about while India 7 trillion and 8 trillion, all that will happen. My worries are that from an HR lens, are we ready? And HR is about, do you have the quality of leadership to get and sustain that 7 trillion, $8 trillion economy? It's a nightmare. Because I see companies, I get invited to, they're nice people. But there is a big issue because we've not invested in them. And in my view, it's already too late. Even today, people should get up. And you need, the other thing that I believe is you need more challengers in your ecosystem. I mean, I look at the board composition of many companies. It is disappointing, Sharad. Very, very disappointing. It's the same type of character. And then we talk about enterprise risk. It's an angular view of even reading what risk is. So I think it needs a little bit more of churn to step back. I mean, there are pockets where I think there is hope. But overall, I still think we are busy doing a job 2 levels lower than and wanting to go 2 levels higher. That's the paradigm.
It's a nice note to sort of end. I think we're conscious of time, but a lot of topics touched, included something which may have appeared as a sales pitch, but it wasn't. So questions and comments, queries, very, very happy to take them.
Is there a mic at the table, please?
Thank you very much. I think two points really hit me very hard. One was you talked about leader and leadership difference. It is like friend and friendship. You can have many friends, but very few friendship. And second, Mumbai Indians. You know, I know you are not fan or not following IPL, but what has happened to Mumbai Indians is possibly because of leader change. Or was it a leadership change? I still don't know. So my question is, it may be easy to change leader within your team, of course, and may be very difficult to change leadership. Whether Mumbai Indians management of Ambani's were leadership and Hardik Pandya was the leader, which possibly was a failure. So I just want to understand from you that while changing leadership, which is more important than changing a leader, when you're talking about changing leadership, what plays role? It is cultural failure or operational excellence failure or hybrid?
So on the IPL specific, Sharad can talk, but I'll give you a normative.
I'm giving you, okay, let us park
I'll give you a
IPL for a while,
response.
but it was a great analogy.
See, I don't know what...
I'm talking about culture important or operational excellence important in changing leadership.
I'll give you a couple of more hooks. Culture is never static. If you damn your culture, you will be damned. So companies would say, Prabir, hamara good culture or bad culture? There's no good or bad culture. The question is culture relevant for whatever is your strategic realities that you are confronted with? I don't know in this particular case, just as an example, Mumbai Indians happens to be one of my ex-employers group, so I also am a little cagey on that. It may have been planned as a succession, who knows, but very poorly handled succession. Terrible. I mean, I think it's an HR disaster, right? It's a PR disaster at worst. And third is, at the end of the day, when you bring in a new person, you either bring the person to change the culture, which again, I don't know, maybe there were problems with the culture, or you assimilate that guy into the new culture if you think your culture is playing for you. And when you hire someone, you always say, this is what we are very proud of. See, the problem in our corporate reality that we say is, we never tell what we are and what we are not, and what is non-negotiable. We don't actually say that. For example, today when I step back, I realize I needed a lot of space. I'm a person, I don't know who's the person. I don't get intimidated with personalities. I can tell the guy whatever, and I've got away with it, so maybe it has reinforced me. But if suppose I am going to join a company where the big guy does not want to be told different, nor has he or she or anyone told me, I am doing only on PR exercise, PPT, image, sales pitch. This is where hypocrisy reigns. So I think if you're wanting to change culture, then say very clearly, there are some things that are broken. We need someone, and a fresh person has no legacy of the past. It becomes easier. And there are some hard decisions. There may be some softer ways of doing it. But if you believe that culture is not the issue, then the question is operationally, what metric are you going to change? In this particular case, you hired a very successful leader, great leader, who has delivered, but is turning out to be a disaster. Is it the problem of that leader? Maybe not. I think it is an absolutely poorly designed, followed through assimilation exercise with people, which is the other sales pitch. I mean, I tell people you hire a very expensive leader, but you don't think through the leadership assimilation process at all. So that will be my response.
One last question, although our time is up, if anyone would want to venture. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversations. What really resonated with me was about what you earlier mentioned about the challenger mindset lacking in pharma. So I would like to know your views on what do you think, in what way can we bring the challenger mindset and how? I mean, what is the challenger mindset that you're talking about?
So, very quickly, it's not just in pharma. This obsession and the belief that when we say challengers, we are saying we will not conform with quality standards or with SOPs, etc. I mean, let's not exaggerate the effect. The spirit of challengers is, are you willing to visualize opportunities and possibilities beyond what you have experienced or what you're seeing? And it's a mindset, it's a culture issue, right? And I believe only when you're willing to kind of encourage challengers, someone who can stand up and say, thank you, Mr. CEO, but I'm not sure I necessarily agree with you. That's all. I mean, he's still the boss. Whatever he finally decides, you will do. But you don't have to be convinced or you've got to agree. I may have a different view. Cultures do not appreciate too much of non-conformist questions, non-conformist experimentation. It's always keep it going. That is the challenge. And it is not just a pharma issue. It is actually a cultural problem. And the reasons why companies start plateauing and decaying is because you've never created a culture. That example I gave you, that Prabir, I want to be an innovation-centered culture. You've never celebrated failure. So willy-nilly you send signals. What questions you ask in your reviews? What kind of thing do you applaud even when you're walking around the floor, right? Messages happen. And I think, personally, I am convinced, I'm not saying everyone must be a challenger, but you must have a fair number of people, and culturally it must be a place which in jargon we call psychological safety, right? You celebrate that and encourage people to ideate, to opine, to think different. That will be my take.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Prabir. That was
Thank you, Sharad. Always a pleasure.